In the busy city of, lived the Gabriel family, Mr. Gabriel, Mrs. Grace, and their precious 5-year-old daughter, Amanda. Their story was one of patience and faith. For 7 long years after their marriage, they had yearned for a child. Their hearts aching with each passing month that left them childless. Those years were filled with prayers and doctor's visits. Their prayers were finally answered when Grace discovered she was pregnant. 9 months later, they welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world. They named her Amanda, for she was the embodiment of their love and the answer to their fervent prayers. As Amanda grew, she filled their home with laughter and joy. She was a curious and bright child, always eager to learn and explore. Mr. Gabriel would often say, "Our Amanda is a gift from God, and we must cherish her always." On this particular day, the air was thick with humidity, promising rain later in the evening. Amanda sat in the living room, surrounded by her favorite dolls, engrossed in her imagination. Grace was planning to make Amanda's favorite dish, jollof rice with chicken, for dinner. As she mentally went through the ingredients, she realized she was missing a few key items. She glanced at the clock, it was 3:30 p.m. Her husband would not be home from work for another 3 hours, and the market was just a short walk away. It will only take me 20 minutes, tops, she thought to herself. Amanda will be fine for such a short while. She walked into the living room and said, "My baby, Mommy needs to quickly run to the market to get some things for our dinner. Will you be a good girl and stay here? I'll be back very soon." Amanda looked up at her mother, her big brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Can I come with you, Mommy?" she asked. Grace shook her head gently. "Not this time, Amanda. It's very hot outside, and I'll be much quicker if I go alone. I promise I'll be back before you know it. You can watch your favorite cartoon while I'm gone, okay?" Amanda agreed, settling back down with her toys. Mrs. Grace turned on the television, finding Amanda's favorite cartoon channel. She then went to the kitchen, making sure there was nothing dangerous within reach. Satisfied that everything was safe, she grabbed her purse and headed for the door. "Remember, Amanda, stay inside and don't open the door for anyone. I will be back very soon," she called out as she left, locking the door behind her. For the first few minutes after her mother left, Love was content watching her cartoons. But as time passed, she began to feel hungry. The cartoon she was watching showed a character making noodles, which only intensified her hunger. "I'm a big girl," she thought to herself. "I can make something to eat like Mommy does." She wandered into the kitchen and spotted a packet of instant noodles, her favorite snack. Amanda knew her mother always cooked them in a pot on the stove, but the pot was too high for her to reach. Amanda dragged a chair from the dining table to the kitchen counter. She climbed up, her small hands gripping the edge of the counter for balance. Standing on tiptoes, she managed to grab the packet of noodles and a small pot. Carefully, she climbed down and placed the pot on the stove. Remembering how her mother did it, she turned one of the knob. Nothing happened. She tried another, and suddenly, a clicking sound was followed by a whoosh as the gas ignited. Pleased with herself, Amanda poured some water into the pot, just like she'd seen her mother do countless times. She tore open the noodle packet, the seasoning sachet falling to the floor. As she bent to pick it up, her elbow knocked against the kitchen towel hanging nearby. The towel fell, one end landing dangerously close to the open flame. Oblivious to the danger, Amanda continued with her task. She was so focused on putting the noodles into the pot that she didn't notice the kitchen towel slowly catching fire. Meanwhile, Grace was at the market, quickly gathering the ingredients she needed. She glanced at her watch, she had been gone for 15 minutes already. Just a few more items, she thought to herself, hurrying through the crowded aisles. Back at the house, the fire from the kitchen towel had spread to the wooden cabinet above the stove. Thick, black smoke began to fill the kitchen. It was only when Amanda heard the crackling sound of the fire that she turned around and saw the flames. Frightened, she jumped down from the chair and ran to the living room. The smoke was beginning to seep into the rest of the house. Amanda, remembering what she'd been taught in school about fire safety, dropped to the floor and crawled towards the front door. But when she reached it, she found she couldn't open it. Her mother had locked it from the outside. Outside, Mrs. Peace, the Gabriel's next-door neighbor, was watering her plants when she smelled smoke. Looking up, she saw dark smoke billowing from the Gabriel's kitchen window. "Fire! Fire!" she shouted, dropping her watering can and running towards the house. Her cries alerted other neighbors, who quickly gathered around. Mr. Joseph, a retired firefighter who lived across the street, took charge of the situation. "Someone called the fire service," he shouted as he ran to his house to grab a fire extinguisher. "And does anyone know if there's someone inside?" "Oh no, little Amanda," Mrs. Peace gasped, remembering seeing Mrs. Grace leave earlier. "I think she might be alone in there." Without hesitation, Mr. Joseph and two other men broke down the front door. They were met with a wall of thick, black smoke. Dropping to their knees, they crawled into the house, calling out for Amanda. They found her in the living room, curled up in a corner, coughing and crying. Mr. Joseph quickly scooped her up and rushed her outside while the others tackled the fire with extinguishers and buckets of water. By the time the fire service arrived, the neighbors had managed to put out most of the fire. The firefighters ensured the fire was completely extinguished and ventilated the house. Mrs. Peace cradled Amanda, who was still coughing and scared. "We need to get her to the hospital," she said, worried about smoke inhalation. Another neighbor offered to drive them to the nearby clinic. As they were about to leave, Mrs. Peace quickly scribbled a note for Mrs. Grace, explaining what had happened and where they had taken Amanda. She left it pinned to what remained of the front door. At the market, Mrs. Grace was just finishing her shopping when she heard sirens in the distance. A sense of unease washed over her, and she hurriedly paid for her items. As she walked briskly home, she saw the fire truck turn onto her street. Her heart racing, she broke into a run. The sight that greeted her was one of nightmares. Her home was damaged, smoke still curling from the windows. A crowd of neighbors stood outside, and firefighters were rolling up their hoses. "Amanda," she cried out, dropping her shopping bags and rushing towards the house. "Where is my daughter?" Mrs. Peace approached her, a somber look on her face. "Mrs. Grace, Amanda is safe. Our neighbors took her to the hospital to be checked for smoke inhalation. There's a note on the door with more details." Relief flooded through Mrs. Grace, quickly followed by guilt and shame. She read the note with trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. "How could you leave such a young child alone?" Mrs. Peace asked, her voice a mixture of concern and disapproval. Anything could have happened. In fact, something did happen. Mrs. Grace couldn't respond. The weight of her actions crashed down upon her. Without a word, she turned and ran towards the main road to find a taxi to the hospital. At his office across town, Mr. Gabriel was in a meeting when his secretary interrupted with an urgent message. His face changed as he listened to the news about the fire and Amanda being taken to the hospital. Abruptly ending the meeting, he rushed out, his heart pounding with fear and worry. When Mr. Gabriel arrived at the hospital, he found his wife in the waiting room, her face buried in her hands as she sobbed quietly. He approached her, a mix of emotions swirling inside him, relief that Amanda was alive, fear for her condition, and anger at the situation. "Grace," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "What happened? How could you leave our daughter alone?" Mrs. Grace looked up at her husband, her eyes red and swollen from crying. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I only went to the market. I thought she would be fine for a few minutes. I never imagined. Her voice trailed off as fresh tears fell. Mr. Gabriel wanted to be angry, but seeing his wife's distress, he softened. He sat down beside her and took her hand. We've prayed for years for Amanda, he said softly. She's a miracle. We need to protect her, always. After what seemed like hours, a doctor approached them. Mr. and Mrs. Gabriel, the doctor asked. I am the doctor treating your daughter, Amanda. How is she, doctor? Mr. Gabriel asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The doctor gave them a reassuring smile. Amanda is going to be fine, he said. She inhaled some smoke, which irritated her lungs, but we've been giving her oxygen therapy. She's responding well to treatment. The parents let out sighs of relief. The doctor led them to Amanda's room, where they found their daughter sitting up in bed, looking small and vulnerable in the large hospital gown. Mommy! Daddy! Amanda cried out when she saw them, her voice a bit raspy from the smoke. Mrs. Grace rushed to her daughter's side, enveloping her in a gentle but firm hug. Oh, my Amanda, she whispered, kissing Amanda's forehead. I'm so sorry. Mommy is so sorry. Mr. Gabriel joined them, wrapping his arms around both his wife and daughter. For a long moment, they stayed like that, a family reunited, grateful for the second chance they'd been given. The next morning, the doctor discharged Amanda, advising plenty of rest. As they prepared to leave the hospital, neighbors and friends arrived with offers of help and support. The Gabriels were overwhelmed by the kindness of their community. On the drive home, Amanda sat between her parents, holding their hands. Mommy, Daddy, I'm sorry I tried to cook by myself, she said in a small voice. Mr. Gabriel squeezed her hand gently. It's okay, Amanda. We know you didn't mean to cause any harm. But from now on, you must promise to never use the stove without an adult present. Did you hear? Amanda nodded solemnly. I promise, she said. As they stood in their living room, surrounded by the lingering smell of smoke and the visible reminders of their near tragedy, the Gabriels held each other close. We've been given another chance, Mrs. Grace said softly. A chance to be better parents, to cherish every moment with our Amanda. Mr. Gabriel nodded, looking down at their daughter. Yes, he agreed. And we won't waste it. Our love, our Amanda, will always come first. From that day forward, the Gabriels approached parenting with a new perspective. They were more vigilant, more present, and more grateful for each day they had with their miracle child. The incident became a turning point in their lives. Through it all, their love for each other and for Amanda only grew stronger, reinforcing the beautiful bond within their family. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel for more interesting stories.